My name is Julia Renner. I'm 39, single, no kids, and until last summer I was living in a tiny walk-up in Portland, Oregon, working a mid-level job at a branding agency. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Quiet, steady, and far from the chaos I'd grown up in. Then came the knock at my door, unexpected, hesitant. Standing there was my father, Thomas Renner, a man who once filled every room with his confidence. Now, he just looked tired. "Julia," he said, not even stepping inside, "it's serious. Renner Home Goods is about to fold." He started the company back in the 90s, turning a weekend woodworking hobby into a full-scale home furnishing business. He taught me the grain of different woods the way other kids learned the alphabet. It was something special. Until it wasn't. Dad never adapted, refused to update our supply chain, ignored e-commerce, and he sure as hell ignored advice, especially mine. I hadn't set foot in that office since I was 22, not by choice. He didn't think women could lead. My younger sister Samantha stayed behind, polished, agreeable, always ready to play the part of the ideal daughter. She married a real estate developer and chaired local galas. Dad adored her. Me? I asked too many questions, pushed too hard, so I left. And yet, here he was, asking me to come back and fix what he broke. I should have said no, but I didn't. That first week was brutal. I slept maybe 2 hours a night, combing through outdated spreadsheets, chasing down forgotten vendors, renegotiating contracts with partners we were months behind paying. It was a mess. But it wasn't unsalvageable. I moved into the old family lake house and took an unpaid leave. Samantha called me brave. I called it necessary. Within 3 months, I struck a major wholesale deal with a national retailer, overhauled logistics, and removed 2 legacy board members, riding on name alone. For the first time in years, Renner Home Goods was profitable again. Employees smiled. My dad hosted a celebratory dinner. He raised a glass, called me his brilliant second chance. I almost believed him. Until a month later, at a private board meeting, he cleared his throat, avoided eye contact, and said, "Julia, what you've done is impressive, but Samantha will be taking over as CEO." But the board believes Samantha is more suited for long-term leadership. I turned toward her. She blinked, feigning surprise, like she hadn't been preparing for this moment since we were teenagers. Then she looked down at her perfectly arranged notes. I didn't say a word, just nodded. Under the table, my hands trembled. Dad added, "Of course, you'll still receive your bonus." Bonus? Like I'd been some temp they hired during holiday rush. I stood up, walked out. Not a single word. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I stayed at the lake house for 2 more nights. Not out of sentiment, but strategy. When people think you've given up, they start speaking freely. They start slipping. That first night, I passed Samantha in the hallway. She was draped in one of Mom's old silk robes, wine glass in hand like it was an accessory. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just smiled. "Don't take it personally, Jules," she said, voice soft, almost sweet. "Dad trusts me to carry the vision forward. You're brilliant, but this place was never really yours." There it was, that gentle venom she'd been serving me since childhood. I didn't ask her what she thought the vision was. I just watched, took note. The next morning I followed her to the office, sat in on meetings. She kept things breezy, short chats, pet names for executives, airy compliments. I noticed how the older male department heads smiled at her, but barely heard a word she said. They nodded politely, then did whatever they wanted. She wasn't respected, she was tolerated, and that made her dangerous, because she didn't even realize it. Meanwhile, I got to work behind the scenes. I still had my contacts, vendors, advisors, junior staff who respected what I'd done, people who didn't owe Samantha anything. That evening, I explored the east wing of the estate. Old, unused storage. I cracked open a rusted filing cabinet and found dust-covered ledgers, client agreements, and something far more valuable. A document, signed by Thomas Renner and my late Uncle Miles, a subsidiary company called Renner Ventures, LLC, created during a brief expansion back in 2003. Still technically active, still owned by the parent company, but separate, untouched. I'd helped revive it during the restructuring. Quietly, cleanly. Dad thought he was 10 steps ahead, but he'd left the back door wide open. The next morning I packed my bags. I didn't say goodbye. On the train back to Portland, I made one call. Eleanor, it's Julia Renner. I need help setting up a consultancy firm. Quietly, and I've got a business proposal I think you'll want to hear. Elora Kim had once been the CFO of a top-tier home goods competitor before she was pushed out for being too aggressive during a merger. We'd only met once, after a design innovation conference in Seattle. Over cocktails, she said something I never forgot. If you ever want to burn something down, I'll bring the matches. She laughed when I reminded her. Oh, Julia, she said, voice calm and clipped. I've been waiting for your call. We met 2 days later at a quiet wine bar tucked behind a bookshop on the east side. She looked exactly the same. Sharp eyes, tailored blazer, presence like a scalpel. She didn't waste time. I've already pulled the corporate docs on Renner Ventures, she said, sliding a folder across the table. You were smart not to dissolve it. The structure's old but sound. And the tax shield on it? Still active. For the next hour, we built the skeleton of a new company. Renner Ventures would relaunch as a boutique consulting firm. Eleanor would handle financial architecture and industry outreach. I'd leverage my contacts, vendors, logistics teams, niche design houses, many of whom still owed me calls from when I saved Renner Home Goods. The goal wasn't sabotage, not directly. We'd undercut the main company quietly, better rates, better efficiency, smarter partnerships. No flashy launches, just a slow shift in loyalty, in whispers, in backroom deals, where real business happens. But even as I mapped it out, part of me still ached for clarity. Why had my father picked Samantha? Why hadn't he seen me? That night, back at my apartment, I opened an old keepsake box from my mom. Inside was a birthday card, never sent, dated the year I turned 12. Her neat handwriting read, "She won't say it, but she's proud of you. Your father doesn't understand girls like you. You're too fast, too sharp. He was taught to value daughters who smile, not lead." It hit harder than I expected. I remembered that night at the dinner table, me with a state science trophy, ignored. Samantha with a ribbon from a school play. Dad stood up and applauded. It wasn't her fault, she was what he understood. But it still left a scar. The next morning I told Eleanor, I don't want to destroy them. I want to become impossible to overlook. She smiled. That's the kind of revenge that lasts. We hired our first team in secret, remote analysts, freelance procurement pros, quiet talent with sharp teeth. You know Julia's just getting started, so don't miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to see how she turns quiet revenge into lasting legacy. No flash, just precision. Then came our first real move. Avalenti Textiles, a boutique Italian manufacturer I'd worked with during the Renner Home Goods recovery, had quietly dropped off their vendor list. Samantha never followed up. I did. Over espresso in Milan, I sat across from Giovanni Valenti, owner and third-generation craftsman. I'm back in the game, I told him. Smaller scale, smarter approach. He didn't even blink. You're the reason we got paid on time last year, he said. And just like that, Renner Ventures had its first major client. I didn't tell Samantha or Dad, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they noticed the drip in their pipeline. 2 weeks later, we signed a distribution consulting contract with a Canadian startup that had once pitched Renner Home Goods, only to be ignored. Eleanor called it low-hanging fruit. I called it a mistake we weren't going to repeat. That month, we quietly locked in 3 more mid-tier clients. Logistics optimization for a Scandinavian design co-op, sourcing strategy for a boutique in Denver, and inventory streamlining for a furniture subscription service in Austin. Quiet work, under the radar, but the whispers started. And then came the invitation. A regional trade summit in Boston, Renner Home Goods was listed as a panel speaker for innovation in heritage brands. Samantha was the scheduled face of the company. But Renner Ventures was on the guest list too. Consultants, observers, networking representatives. Eleanor and I didn't hesitate. I want her to see me, I told Eleanor on the flight, not out of spite, just to remind her I still exist. Eleanor smirked. You want her to wonder how you got in. That night in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I remembered a moment I'd bury, me, at 13, dressed in khakis and a polo, standing at the window of our old house. Dad had taken Samantha golfing with a client. When they came home, sunburned and laughing, he looked at me and said, "You wouldn't have liked it, Jules. Too boring for someone like you." Someone like me. At the summit, Samantha looked flawless. But I saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands smoothed her blazer over and over. She spoke about preserving legacy while embracing innovation. It sounded rehearsed. A journalist raised a hand. What about Valenti Textiles exiting your vendor list? She hesitated. We chose to part ways due to strategic differences. Her left hand twitched. And later, in the hallway, she saw me. Her face stiffened. "Julia," she said, as if my name were a problem she hadn't planned for. "I didn't know you were still involved." "I'm not," I said evenly. "I'm simply expanding." Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "Dad doesn't like surprises." "He'll adjust," I replied. "He's had practice." That night, Eleanor and I toasted with champagne in our hotel room overlooking the harbor. "I don't think she knows yet," she said, swirling the glass. "She will," I replied, "but by then she'll be reacting, not leading." The next morning, I got a private message from Alan Ridge, a former Renner home goods accountant I hadn't heard from in years. He wanted to meet, said it was important. We picked a quiet cafe in downtown Boston, tucked between a bookstore and a florist, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough to trade secrets. Alan looked older than I remembered, his shoulders hunched under a worn wool coat. When I slid into the booth, he didn't waste time. "I never wanted to be part of this," he said, eyes locked on mine. "But I needed the paycheck." "Part of what?" He slid a manila folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Spreadsheets, flagged emails, internal memos. Some stamped, some signed, a few clearly forged. It didn't take long to see the truth. Samantha had been moving money. Carefully. Quietly. Channeling funds from Renner Home Goods into a marketing firm based in San Diego, run by her husband's cousin. Duplicate charges, inflated contracts, shell invoices, all approved under Samantha's name. I stared at him. "She's laundering money?" "She'd call it strategic outsourcing," Alan said. "But yes, it's bleeding the company. Slowly. And no one's watching." He sipped his coffee, eyes dim. "Your father signs anything she puts in front of him. And why are you telling me this?" Alan exhaled. "Because, when you came back, I thought maybe someone finally gave a damn. Samantha's not malicious. She's just careless, and she doesn't believe consequences apply to her." I walked back to my hotel with the folder pressed to my chest like it might explode. For the next 3 days, Eleanor and I tore through every document. The damage wasn't catastrophic. Not yet. But it was enough to eventually trigger an audit. Enough to bury Renner Home Goods under the weight of its own blind loyalty. Eleanor leaned back in her chair after combing through the last spreadsheet. "We could take this public." "No," I said, "not yet. I want to give her a choice." "You think she'll make the right one?" "I think she'll panic." That night, I drafted a letter. Not to Samantha. Not yet. I addressed it to someone who had once earned my respect on the board. Paul Kern. He was old school, quiet, but principled. The kind of man who read every line of a budget and remembered names from the production floor. I enclosed copies of 3 forged invoices, asked for a private meeting. I didn't sign it as CEO of Renner Ventures. I signed it, Julia Renner, Strategic Advisor, former. I wanted them to remember who had stepped in when the company was bleeding, who had saved them before. That night, I sat in my apartment in Portland, staring at a framed photo of my mother. She was laughing in it, genuine, unfiltered. One of the few moments we'd ever caught on film where she wasn't poised or polished. I whispered, "Am I doing the right thing?" The room stayed silent save for the distant hum of the Max line rattling down Burnside. The next morning, Paul Kern called. "I'll meet you," he said. "And Julia, thank you for not going to the press." Yet, we met at an old private club downtown, the kind filled with dark wood, leather chairs, and men who wore their watches older than I was. Paul sat across from me, holding the folder like it weighed more than it should. "I'll admit," he began, "I didn't believe it at first. But I've reviewed every page. You're not wrong." I let him sit with it. "She's clever," he said at last. "Not smart, but clever. She moved just enough to stay invisible." "And Dad?" I asked quietly. Paul exhaled. "He's tired. And after your mother died, Samantha became what was easiest." She smiled. She stayed soft. "You, Julia, you were always his storm." That hurt, because it was true. "I'm not asking you to oust her," I said. "I just want the bleeding to stop." Paul nodded slowly. "Then let's stop it." "Let me handle it internally," Paul said. "If we go public now, it'll kill the company. Quiet inquiries first. A third-party audit." "But Julia," he added, voice low, "this isn't going to stay quiet forever." "I know." Later that week, Eleanor and I were sitting in her loft in Portland, surrounded by printouts and glowing laptop screens. We were cross-checking supplier logs when she asked, "What if it doesn't work? What if Paul backs out?" "Then we escalate," I said, "but not until I know Samantha can't shift the blame somewhere else." Eleanor paused, then said quietly, "I know what that's like." She told me how, at her old firm, she'd flagged a financial discrepancy in the annual report, only to be eased out by the same executives who once praised her tenacity. They'd labeled her divisive, too emotional, too proud. "I've spent 5 years proving I wasn't crazy," she said, barely above a whisper. "Helping you. It feels like redemption." I reached across the table, squeezed her hand for a second. "You're not crazy. You're necessary." Meanwhile, whispers of Renner Ventures started surfacing in industry corners. A niche trade blog mentioned an agile consultancy quietly reshaping vendor negotiations. A procurement director told a colleague, "I'm going where the real thinkers are." Back at Renner Home Goods, Samantha started to crack. Alan messaged me again. "She's calling emergency meetings. No agenda, no direction. It's chaos." "Good," I told Eleanor. "But not good enough. I'm not here just to watch her fall. I'm preparing to take her place." 3 days after my meeting with Paul, Renner Home Goods sent a vague clarification statement to vendors about their accounting processes. Corporate fluff. All caution, no clarity. Eleanor scanned it over lunch and smirked. This is what people do when they know something's coming, but not from where. Alan confirmed it. Paul had greenlit the audit. Quiet, unofficial, but already stirring tension behind closed doors. Samantha was livid, called it a witch hunt, accused her own team of betrayal. Staff morale plummeted. Then the envelope arrived. My father's birthday. A formal dinner at the family estate. I hadn't been invited to one of those in years. I stared at the heavy ivory card like it might explode. "You going?" Eleanor asked. "I have to," I said, because that dinner would tell me everything I needed to know. I arrived late, deliberately. The dining room glowed with old money. Familiar names, Richard's friends, board members, and Samantha. Samantha was there, draped in emerald silk, swirling her wine like nothing was burning behind her eyes. When she saw me enter, her smile flickered. "Didn't expect to see you," she said through clenched teeth. "I'm hard to get rid of," I replied. Thomas Renner stood at the head of the table, looking older than I remembered, tired, hollow even. When he raised his glass for a toast, his voice cracked. To family, to loyalty. The word hung in the air like smoke, heavy, unwelcome. After dinner, Paul caught me in the hallway near the study. "They're getting nervous," he murmured. "The auditors are already flagging inconsistencies." "Enough to act on?" "Give it a few more days," he said. "Then it'll be undeniable." Samantha found me just as I was gathering my coat, her eyes slightly glassy but locked onto mine with practiced precision. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I don't play to win," I said calmly. "I play to survive." She stepped closer. "He'll never choose you, Julia, no matter what you prove." I smiled, small and sharp. "He won't have to." I didn't say goodbye to Thomas. Back in Portland, I updated Eleanor over dinner. We're almost there, I told her. But we need one final move, something that makes the board look at me and see possibility. You want them to see you the way your father never did, she said gently. No, I whispered. I want them to see the truth and regret ever looking away. The audit report landed on Paul Kern's desk Monday morning. By Wednesday, 3 more board members had reviewed it. By Friday, Samantha was called into an emergency executive session. Not invited Thomas. They want him insulated, Paul told me quietly. He's too compromised to think clearly. Eleanor and I were already ahead. We finalized a 20-slide presentation, just numbers, strategy, and solutions. No bitterness, no blame. The last slide said only 3 words, crisp in black serif font. We begin again. I'm not burning the house down, I told Eleanor. I'm rebuilding the foundation. She nodded. Then make sure they see it, before she sets the whole place on fire. Samantha didn't go quietly. She tried to shift the blame first to the CFO, then to a junior consultant so new he barely knew the layout of the office, let alone how to orchestrate a financial cover-up. When that didn't stick, she spun a story about sabotage, claiming Renner Home Goods had become a target of jealous competitors. But the board had the spreadsheets, the wire transfers, the signatures. When Thomas Renner was finally briefed on everything, Paul told me he sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then he said she meant well. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. The following Monday, I was invited to present to the board. I didn't walk in with fire. I walked in with clarity. The room was still. A few board members avoided eye contact. Paul gave me a brief, steady nod. I'm not here to point fingers, I began. I'm here because this company still has a future, but it can't move forward by clinging to the past. Tradition isn't a strategy. Nostalgia doesn't pay invoices. I laid out the full plan. A restructuring of Renner Home Goods, with Renner Ventures folded into a broader innovation arm. A hybrid leadership model grounded in transparency, digital agility, and data-driven decision-making. A cultural shift toward integrity, one that left room for legacy but demanded accountability. I didn't mention Samantha's name. I didn't have to. When I finished, the room was quiet, no applause, but no resistance either. We'll deliberate, said Helen Reyes, a board member who once refused to shake my hand after a pitch. In the corridor outside, my father was waiting. He looked smaller now, faded, shoulders slumped. You think you've proven something, he said quietly. No, I answered. I've built something. He shook his head. You don't understand loyalty. I understand that silence isn't loyalty, I replied. It's fear, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. He didn't respond. That night, Eleanor opened a bottle of champagne. To the end, she said. I raised my glass, to the beginning. 48 hours later, Paul called. They voted, 7-2. You're in, interim CEO, full authority. Your plan's being adopted, immediately. I stood in my Portland kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. Outside, a woman jogged by with her dog. A city bus rumbled past. And somewhere across town, Samantha was reading the same email I had just received. I sat across from the logistics director in the warehouse break room, boots still damp from the rain outside, no slides, no suit, just questions, and the patience to really hear the answers. That's how I spent my first 10 days. Not on press releases or grand unveilings, but in supply rooms, design studios, accounting offices, and vendor Zoom calls. I asked what was working, what wasn't, what had been ignored, and most importantly, what they needed from leadership. Some were hesitant, others relieved, a few even smiled. By the end of the second week, the shift was noticeable. People moved with a little more energy, spoke with a little more clarity. Fear hadn't vanished, but it had stepped back. I wasn't there to punish. I was there to rebuild. Eleanor came by the office one night, carrying a box of archival materials we'd requested from a retired designer who once worked with my mother. Inside were color swatches, handwritten notes, a children's book manuscript, and marketing concepts for a line called Sprout and Stitch, a playful, sustainable brand for kids' textiles. She was ahead of her time, Eleanor said, thumbing through a sketch of a giraffe print quilt set. She just didn't have the support, I whispered, or the voice. I looked at the old brass key again, now tucked into my blazer pocket every day, a reminder, not just of my mother's dreams, but of my responsibility. I want this line, I told Eleanor. Under her name, not mine. She nodded. We'll do it right. No noise, no ego, just impact. By the end of the month, we'd commissioned a small team to begin development under a new division of Renner Ventures, a legacy project backed by quiet strength. On a rainy Friday evening, I stood by the window of my office, watching the streetcars pass through downtown Portland. The same view my father once had, the same office Samantha had once occupied. But now, finally, it felt like mine. I wasn't here to be applauded. I was here to create something that outlived me, to fix what was broken, and to build what had never been given a chance to exist. I asked them what had been broken, what they were afraid to say before, and they told me. I wrote down everything: concerns, frustrations, solutions. Eleanor worked late beside me every night, even when she wasn't obligated. She never accepted an official title, but her influence was everywhere, woven into our projections, our new policy language, the tone of our internal memos. We weren't just managing chaos, we were rebuilding the culture. One evening, after signing off on a new supplier agreement under our ethical sourcing policy, she looked at me across the table and said, "You don't just want to run Renner Home Goods, you want to change it." I nodded. If all I do is keep the machine running, then what was all this for? 2 weeks later, I reopened the attic at the estate. The air was thick with dust and memory. I found the old hope chest, still locked. The brass key in my blazer pocket clicked easily. Inside, fabric samples, hand-drawn patterns, whimsical characters, marketing drafts written in my mother's handwriting, her dream of a children's line. Soft textures, playful prints, storytelling woven into seams. I brought everything into the office and spread it out on the conference table. The staff passed by. One designer, Rosa, stopped and stared. She covered her mouth with her hand. She was ahead of her time, she whispered. She just ran out of it, I said softly. We launched the Eliza collection the following quarter, named after my mother, built from her original concepts, adapted by our current team. A portion of the profits would fund textile design scholarships for women in underserved communities. The board approved it unanimously. Thomas Renner never came to see it. But he did send a letter, no return address, just a simple, typed note. I still don't understand you, but I was wrong, that much I know. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. Samantha moved to Seattle, started a boutique agency with her husband. She never reached out. I didn't expect her to. The day the Eliza collection launched, Eleanor stood beside me in a quiet gallery downtown. No big press, just clients, colleagues, and quiet legacy. I used to think burning it all down was the only way to be seen, she said. And now? I asked. She smiled. Now I think building something better speaks louder. I looked at the fabrics, the name Renner on the wall, no longer his shadow. I didn't take anything from them, I said. I just took back what was mine all along. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for walking this road with me. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it for every person who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they didn't belong in rooms they helped build. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, not just about me, but about you. Have you ever had to fight for your place in a family, a job, a dream? Have you ever taken back something that was always rightfully yours? What did it take? What did it cost? Your words matter. Your experience matters. Let this be more than just my story. Let it be a space for all of us who've ever been the storm in a room full of mirrors. And if you're still in that in-between place, building in the dark, healing from betrayal, waiting for your moment, I want you to know you're not crazy. You're not too much. You're not wrong for wanting more than survival. Here's what I've learned. You don't need to burn it all down to be seen, but you do need to build something real, something that reflects who you are, not who they told you to be. Start small, start quiet, but start. And if my story resonated with you, If it sparks something in you, subscribe to this channel. It's not just about one story, it's about a movement, a reclaiming, a reminder that legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we choose to create. Support the builders, encourage the silent fighters, and above all, remind yourself that your voice belongs in every room you walk into. I'm Julia Renner, and this time, I'm not asking for permission. I'm just getting started.